Welcome into your Cricket Wireless Fantasy Football Update here on getsportsinfo. I'm Dan Clasgens. He's James Adams, and this is 4 weeks into the season now, James. We're looking at our rosters. We have a lot of teams, as does everybody out there, but it's time where you really start assessing the performance of some players early on, and through 4 weeks, there have been some real fantasy fizzlers. I'll tell you who's tops my list is quarterback Matthew Stafford of the Lions. He just doesn't look right, James. He had the injury in week 3 that forced him out, once again raising those durability questions. But he's only managed 1 touchdown in each of his 4 starts. The Lions offense looks out of sync. I'm not prepared to cut him by any measures, but I can no longer consider him a place where we both had him. And when the season started, that was as a top 5 fantasy quarterback. He needs to do it a couple weeks before I'm ready to elevate him back to that status.
Yeah, Dan. I had him as my number 2 quarterback coming into the year. And quite frankly, he's borderline not even a starter at this point. If you've got better options, if he's a guy maybe you backed up with RG3, you got to start thinking about putting Stafford on the bench. Injury or not, he just hasn't performed. It's starting to look like last year was a little bit of a facade, not the real deal. A guy who I had ranked very similarly was Julio Jones, a guy I had as my number 2 receiver on the board, and he's just been a disappointment. He's had 2 decent weeks, but he's had 2 weeks that were just nothing. He's put up 14 yards in week 2, 30 yards in week 2. He's getting the targets, so the problem with him is he's not making catches. He's dropping balls in the end zone. He's just not catching the ball. And, Matt Ryan's eventually going to get tired of watching those balls hit to the ground. He's already gone to Roddy White a lot more, especially this past week. So Julio Jones, a guy in my top 2 really as a receiver, the guy right after Calvin Johnson, and he's barely warrant being even a wide receiver 2 at this point.
Well, the good thing about Julio Jones is why he has disappointed. You have to like the way the Falcons' offense is playing. The kid has talent. I think in his case, it's just a matter of time. But nonetheless, will fantasy owners be able to burden that time during these critical weeks ahead? I'll tell you, Darren McFadden, James, we both talked about him. I flat out said if he stayed healthy, he would be fantasy football's number 1 scoring running back this season. Well, the good news is, through 4 games, health has not been a concern. The greater concern for McFadden owners is the fact that he's averaged less than 3 yards per carry now in 3 of his 4 starts. If you're not in a PPR league, week 1 wasn't even that good. I'm starting to get concerned about the Raiders' offense. They've suffered a ton of injuries in the receiving game. The offensive line's playing subpar. McFadden is going to need to get it going sooner rather than later to deliver on that RB1 value that we all had tagged him with.
Yeah, I was right on board with you on McFadden as well, Dan. I certainly was looking at him as a guy who could be next year's number 1 overall draft pick. And last year, he looked like he was on his way to being this year's top pick before getting injured and not being able to see the field. McFadden's been a big disappointment. And it looked like he would be even better this year when he lost Michael Bush in the backfield with him, and that hasn't made any difference. I'll stay over on the West Coast. A tight end who's really fizzling in my book, Antonio Gates. This is a guy who I heard so many good things about. It was going to be the resurgent year of Antonio Gates, maybe the last great hurrah. Well, through 4 games, and you can't even say 4 games because he missed one, Antonio Gates he's been middle-of-the-road tight end at best. 59 yards, the most he's got. No more than 4 catches in a game. Hasn't scored a touchdown yet. And on top of it all, in week 2, Antonio Gates was looking like he was going to play. He was listed as questionable. And usually, you can bank on a guy like that. He ends up not playing, left a lot of fantasy owners with goose eggs, and he was in a 4 o'clock game that week. So on top of the fact that he didn't play, if you didn't have somebody in a 4 o'clock or a Monday, Sunday night matchup that week, you got nothing from your tight end position. So Antonio Gates is a guy who I bought in as maybe a guy who could be up there with Aaron Hernandez, maybe even Graham and Gronk, and he has been sorely disappointing for me this year.
Tight end's just such a deep position. That's what's making it even harder to continue to play him. And, he's got to get healthy. We all questioned his injury status coming into the season, and thus far, the old man is looking like he's starting to show his age. James, looking forward to catching you on Sunday. Everybody can tune in. It is our Cricket Wireless Fantasy Football Game Day. Fox Sports 1360, foxsports1360.com. We'll get you ready for game day. In the meantime, stay tuned to getsportsinfo.com. And, of course, follow us on Twitter at getsportsinfo. Like us on Facebook. For James Adams, I'm Dan Clasgens. Good luck and enjoy the games.